Hello there, and welcome to the online training session for GoPass organizational representatives. The purpose of this training is to provide organizations who are already using GoPass with an overview of the program. This is specifically tailored to new organizational representatives and/or organizational representatives looking for a basic refresher on using GoPass. Let's get started. The GoPass system is an online system run by the Department of Education that you will use to track the eligibility status of your volunteers. It's based on the DOE system used called PETS to track employees and contractors that work in schools. That system tracks hundreds of thousands of people, so we know it is robust. Since the GoPass program is built on the PETS system, you may still see some references specific to the Department of Education as opposed to volunteers. I will point those out along the way. Ultimately, GoPass does what it was designed to do, which is to allow you to track your volunteers' eligibility status in real time. The GoPass program is a partnership between NYC Service, a division of the Mayor's Office, and the NYC Department of Education's Office of Personnel Investigations. NYC Service manages the program by providing support to the Department of Education, as the Department of Education provides the system used to track volunteers and performs the fingerprinting and background check processes. Why do nonprofit organizations or city agencies need GoPass? It is a highly encouraged best practice to screen volunteers that work with vulnerable populations. GoPass was created by NYC Service to provide nonprofit organizations and city agencies with an inexpensive way to screen volunteers for that very purpose. In the next section, we will talk a little bit more about the overall structure of the GoPass system. The GoPass system falls under the following diagram. And please do remember that at the top of this diagram is you, the GoPass representative, who is logging into the system utilizing their username and password created for you by the GoPass team. You, as the GoPass representative in the system, is the primary person that will receive notifications about eligibility via email and who the GoPass team will contact about any day-to-day issues. Once you've logged in, your organization has projects. Projects are essentially how the system groups volunteers. All volunteers must be assigned to a project. You might have several projects, one for each program that uses volunteers, or one for each location where you place volunteers. It's really up to you what projects you create, or maybe you just put all your volunteers under the same project. The system takes volunteers and breaks them down into two categories: new volunteers and existing volunteers. We make a distinction here, even though in the system they are just listed as volunteers. New volunteers are people that your organization is sponsoring who are new to GoPass. You are adding them to your system, helping them through the application process, and typically paying for their background check. Existing volunteers are people who have already gone through GoPass. If a volunteer comes to you and says that they have gone through the screening process before, you can confirm this as well as their eligibility status and proceed to add them to your roster. A critical caveat here is that if you have a volunteer who has gone through a non-GoPass background check through the Department of Education previously, then that volunteer may show up as eligible in the system. However, even if a volunteer has gone through a DOE background check previously, volunteers must be screened again for GoPass. We are required to keep our background checks separate from the Department of Education's employee vendor background checks, as volunteers are screened under a different law. What matters most to you here is the way to tell if a volunteer's status as eligible in the GoPass system is from a non-GoPass background check or not. GoPass fingerprints-based background checks require a photograph attached to the profile of your volunteer. So if a volunteer does not have a photo on their profile, then you know that they have not been cleared specifically for GoPass. As we move through this training, I will show you an example of a volunteer's profile page a little bit later, so you know how to identify this. In the next section, we will dive into more specific information about volunteers. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the GoPass team has suspended most background check processes. We recognize that many organizations are uniquely working through this trying time and wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that these adjustments are temporary. The next section will involve diving deeper into fingerprinting procedures prior to the COVID-19 pandemic with GoPass. When using the GoPass program, all volunteers are sponsored. This means that volunteers themselves cannot request to be background checked or fingerprinted via GoPass. They must volunteer with a GoPass using organization, and that organization must add them to their roster to be screened. For each volunteer, you will need to obtain the demographic information listed on this slide, including, but not limited to, a volunteer's date of birth, full social security number, and email address. Once this information is collected, you, as the user representative, will enter that information into your organization's roster. If the person is an existing volunteer, be sure to confirm that the information listed is correct. Once a volunteer is added to your roster, they will receive an email within 24 to 48 hours from another DOE system called Applicant Gateway. Applicant Gateway is the online system that the Department of Education uses to collect employment applications, as well as GoPass volunteer applications. The volunteer must click the link, complete their online application, and print a referral form, which they will take to one of the required fingerprinting locations. The last thing to note here is that the Applicant Gateway link does expire after 30 days. If it does, please reach out to the GoPass team at gopass@schools.nyc.gov to reissue a new link. We've wrapped up the basics about volunteers. Let's move on to dive deeper into fingerprinting. The DOE GoPass team provides 3 primary ways of getting printed. The Walk-in Fingerprinting Center at 65 Court Street in downtown Brooklyn is the first. No appointment is necessary here. This is the quickest, fastest, and most common option that organizations utilize to screen their volunteers. This center is open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Once there, the volunteer will present the referral form and their government-issued photo ID and are fingerprinted and photographed. The fingerprinting location at 100 Gold Street in downtown Manhattan is another common option. This location is available by appointment only, meaning to schedule a fingerprinting appointment at 100 Gold Street, you must reach out to the GoPass team in advance. If your organization is paying for the fingerprinting of your volunteers, please be sure to sort this out with the DOE team prior to the volunteer's arrival at any of these locations. The last fingerprinting option available for your organization is called a mobile unit. For groups of 25 volunteers or more, you can request that the DOE send a mobile fingerprinting unit and technicians to your location within the 5 boroughs. The mobile unit is capable of processing at least 12 volunteers per hour. The mobile unit accepts debit, credit cards, money orders, corporate checks, or personal checks for payment of fingerprinting processing fees. Your organization does have the option of paying for all volunteers fingerprinted during a mobile unit event in bulk, but this must be paid at the event. Mobile units operate Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Please make your requests at least 4 weeks in advance. Events are typically 2 to 3 hours, and requests for the mobile unit during normal business hours are preferred. Any volunteer who is unable to attend the mobile session is welcome to be fingerprinted at the 65 Court Street location, or the organization can schedule a visit for those volunteers at 100 Gold Street. This is a final reminder that what we've just discussed is a procedure that applied prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the next section, we will move on to discuss how the background check process works. This graphic illustrates how the various moving parts of the GoPass background check process interact. At the top, we have NYC Service and the NYC DOE partnering together to operate the GoPass program. Your organization falls right under this, along with the volunteers that serve your constituents. Once a volunteer is fingerprinted, their prints are transmitted to the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, DCJS, with a request for a statewide criminal background check. This kind of check pulls in all information regarding arrests and convictions. This is important because it is more comprehensive than simply checking the state sex offender registry, as you have to have been convicted to be listed in that registry. This check allows DOE investigators to see arrests that did not lead to a conviction, for whatever reason, and take those into account when determining the eligibility status of a volunteer. DCJS completes their process, retransmits the prints to the FBI with the request for a nationwide criminal background check. The results are combined and transmitted back to the Department of Education's Office of Personnel Investigations, where dedicated investigators review the information. If this process is entirely digital, it takes about 1 week. Sometimes the fingerprinting technicians can't get good electronic scans, in which case they must use a backup set of ink prints. If the technicians must use those ink prints, this can add about 2 to 3 weeks to the process. On occasion, both electronic and ink prints are not sufficient. The DOE technicians will then conduct an FBI name check, which can take up to 4 to 6 weeks. In the best and majority of cases for volunteers, you should have their information complete within 1 week. In the worst case scenario, it can take up to 6 weeks to process a volunteer's information. These situations are not frequent and occur because fingerprints wear down with age and injury. We often notice that this happens with older volunteers, but there is a growing number of younger volunteers who have worn down prints due to touchscreen technology. The GoPass investigator who reviews the results will either clear the volunteer or put them under investigation. If the volunteer is cleared, they show up as eligible on your roster. If an investigation is required, you will be notified via email that they are ineligible from an automated GoPass email, and the OPI personnel will reach out to the volunteer directly to notify them of the investigation and any need for additional information. I'm going to run through a few additional things to keep in mind with regards to the background checks of volunteers. The volunteer's privacy is protected during any investigation. You will only know that the volunteer is ineligible, not why they are ineligible. Volunteers can opt out of an investigation at any time. Most investigations are minor and are cleared up within a day or two, provided that the volunteer responds to the investigator's contact attempts. Some investigations take longer, may involve an interview, etc., but in general, the duration of a volunteer's investigation really does vary. Overall, if the volunteer is deemed ineligible for GoPass, the DOE OPI personnel will let you know so that you can deactivate them from your roster. Reasons for ineligibility vary. OPI won't provide specifics, but it's basically the same background check that a school employee goes through, but adjusted for volunteers rather than employees. There is a legal team at the Department of Education that ensures that determinations comply with the vulnerable populations law. To reiterate, most volunteers are cleared within a few business days, and you can always contact us to find out the status of one or more of your volunteers as they go through this process. In this section, we are going to discuss the utilization of the GoPass system itself. When you first log into the GoPass system, you will see a bulletin board. If you've just started, it will ask you to add a volunteer. Normally, however, the bulletin board will list your projects and show you a summary of information about the volunteers on those projects. You can click through to see details. This slide also outlines additional information regarding the bulletin board point, including redirects and alerts. This slideshow shows what a bulletin board looks like when you have a few projects with active volunteers. Each line is a project, and it lists the number of eligible and ineligible volunteers on that project. Additionally, I'll run through a few quick notes on eligibility versus ineligibility. If there is no need for additional information or clarification, volunteers are considered eligible for the GoPass program. You will be able to log into the GoPass system and see that this is updated. This essentially means that your volunteer is good to go and ready to serve. If you are notified that your volunteer is deemed ineligible, keep in mind a few things. There are a few different reasons for volunteers to be ineligible in the system, so there really is no need to panic. When you enter your volunteers in the GoPass roster, they will all automatically become ineligible by default. Here are some more specific reasons why a volunteer may be deemed ineligible. A, their fingerprints have not yet been processed. B, they've had 2 failed set of prints, i.e. the electronic and ink prints failed. Or C, they are currently under investigation. If there are ineligible volunteers, there will be an alert link that you can access within the system. Clicking on that alert link will bring up the next screen. This pop-up window alert demonstrates that Mr. Florentino is ineligible because of the code no prints on file / no prints taken. This is the most common reason to be ineligible, and it really just means that the background check results haven't come back from DCJS just yet. He may have been fingerprinted, yes, but that information does not get updated until the system receives a transmission about the volunteer. There is an action checkbox here as well. This is a convenience feature for communication between multiple GoPass representatives from the same organization. So let's say that your GoPass representative gets a notification email that says, Mr. Florentino is under investigation and not eligible for service. This representative will go into the system to confirm that this is correct, contact whoever needs to be contacted to make sure that he doesn't volunteer with any vulnerable populations until it's cleared up, and then checks the action checkbox. When a second GoPass representative from your organization opens the same email later in the morning or in the afternoon, they will see that action was already taken by the first representative and at what time that happened. The action checkbox here is just for communication amongst yourselves. The DOE is not notified about that. Speaking of notifications, if you have aggressive spam filters, please whitelist info@nycgopass.org. This is the address used to send all notifications from the system to you, the GoPass user representative. In becoming the GoPass user representative on file, every day that you have active, ineligible volunteers on your roster, you will receive a daily notification of ineligible volunteers that lists all of those active but ineligible volunteers. This includes volunteers that have not yet been fingerprinted. Once you add your first batch of volunteers to the roster, you will receive one of these notices every day until everyone is either eligible or deactivated. The list will get shorter and shorter day by day as people are cleared. You will never get an email notification that says that a volunteer is eligible. There are a few important reasons for this, but in summary, we want you to log in and confirm volunteer eligibility in real time. Emails are not so secure. They can sit around, they can get outdated, and we want to avoid getting false positives. There is also a notice that you may receive titled Notification of Ineligibility Due to Problem Code. This is a red flag from the system telling you that a particular volunteer is now under investigation for whatever reason. If it is an existing volunteer, then you may be getting one because the volunteer was arrested in New York State. The Department of Education has a real-time reporting relationship with DCJS that allows the system to be notified when someone is arrested. If you receive one of these emails about an existing volunteer, then you need to contact whomever needs to be contacted in your organization to ensure that the volunteer does not work with vulnerable populations until the issue is cleared up and they are declared eligible for GoPass service again. We've discussed quite a few things thus far, and we'll now move on to discuss how to actually add a volunteer into the system. In this section, we will talk about how to add a volunteer to the GoPass system. As mentioned previously, you will need the last name and social security number of your volunteer, as well as their basic contact information. You will enter that into the system and click Continue, and we'll see this page pop up. This page is called the Volunteer Profile page. If the volunteer is already in the DOE system, perhaps screened as an employee or a teacher before, their information will mostly be filled in. All you have to do as the GoPass using representative is to confirm it. Pay close attention to getting the most updated email address here, which may be missing or incorrect. If this is a new volunteer, you will need to fill in all the required fields: date of birth, address, phone number, and email. On this page, towards the bottom left, you will notice both the current DOE employee and current DOE title sections. These will be grayed out and are legacies of the system that do not apply to volunteers and have no bearing on GoPass eligibility. Triple check that the email address does not have any typos, as this is how the applicant gateway system will send the volunteer background questionnaire to the applicant. Once you fill in all the information on this page, you will need to assign the volunteer to a project. As you scroll down, you will see this next slide. Here, you will click on New Project. Remember, each volunteer must be assigned to at least one project. You can assign a volunteer to multiple projects if you want. When you click New Project, this blue row will appear. Working left to right, you select the project from the drop-down menu. The work title will always be volunteer, and this is the only available choice. The roster status is either active or inactive. And the difference is that you will only receive notifications about volunteers that are active in the system. So for example, if you have a volunteer who is under an investigation and you're tired of getting the daily emails about them, you can set them to inactive, but they have to start out as active. The start date and end date here are optional. Fill these out if you want the volunteer to automatically be inactivated after the end date. Now, we are almost done adding a volunteer here. The last thing that you would need to do is save. And to do that, there is a tricky glitch about the system. Once you fill in all the information about the project, you need to come back over to the left and click Add. That makes the project assignment. Then you click Save, and that saves the volunteer to your roster under that assignment. Once you do that, the GoPass system will talk to the applicant gateway system, and the volunteer will receive an email with a link to complete their application online. Don't forget, if the link expires, just reach out to the GoPass team at the DOE to reissue a new link, and that's it. In the next section, we will talk about additional things that you can do in the GoPass system. In this section, we will discuss additional things that you can do in the GoPass system. Firstly, you can manage your projects. You can add new ones, change existing ones, and make any additional adjustments as necessary, as the slide depicts here. To add a new project, click New Project. Fill in the project name. The program type is GoPass, as it is the only choice available. The initiation date and expiration date are required here. This is a legacy of the system being used to track contracts. Some projects are ongoing, so for those, you can use an expiration date far in the future. The expiration date can be up to 20 years from today. Then you click Save to save the new project. You can click the notepad icon to edit a project, or the big red X to delete it. In the next section, we will discuss viewing your organization's roster. There are 3 kinds of rosters in the GoPass system. The one that lists all of the volunteers in your organization, the roster that lists the volunteers on each project, and a custom-based roster for the third. All of the rosters have the information outlined on this slide, including name, date of birth, nonprofit status, and eligibility status. The search for a custom roster looks like this. You will fill in one or more fields and then click Search. So for example, you could search for all volunteers with the last name Jones, or all active but ineligible volunteers. Some other things that you can do in the GoPass system include changing your password. There is a contact form inside the GoPass system, but this is only for a technical issue with the system itself. Please email the GoPass email address if you have any questions or encounter any issues. If you would like to review all of the steps that we have covered and the frequently asked questions document that has answers and advice for common GoPass system issues, please feel free to reach out to us at gopass@schools.nyc.gov. You also have the option to export a list of the volunteers recorded under a specific project. It is also to be noted that when exporting lists, organizations should wait 24 hours for the list to be updated before exporting. The list might not get updated otherwise. And of course, you can log out of the system. You will automatically be logged out after 15 minutes of inactivity. A few additional things to keep in mind is that volunteers must be 18 years or older to be eligible for GoPass. Volunteers must have a Social Security number, and individuals not authorized to work in the United States who do not have a Social Security number are not eligible. Again, a final note that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the GoPass team has suspended most background check processes and continue to update GoPass user representatives on adjustments to any screening or system processes accordingly. As always, troubleshooting is what we are here to do. All questions and comments regarding the GoPass program and how it works should be directed to gopass@schools.nyc.gov. Thank you for your time. You can download a copy of this presentation and reach out to us regarding your username and password. Have a great day.